as well as being a bird perch today. I have just finished a classic sci-fi book that is kind of perfection in my opinion. James Blish, A Case of Conscience. Now, James Blish is one of those authors like Clifford D. Simak, like Andre Norton. Whenever I see a new book, I'm a little bit excited and a little bit worried. Excited because almost everything they write is great and I love it. Worried because when they get it wrong, it's just a little bit... they don't even get it wrong. It's just sometimes they date badly. This one hasn't. This one was excellent. Classic sci-fi of the best sort in my opinion, because there is a fair amount of science, and not just one science but a little bit of many sciences. You've got biology, you've got physics, you've got maths, and at the same time you've got a very strong what if scenario. What I loved about the classic sci-fi and fantasy was there was always a what if element. And the what if here is involved in what if discovering a new world. Now this book was first published in 1958, which makes it quite old. James Blish himself, I think he died in the 70s, which was a great loss to writing kind, if you ask me. He won a Hugo Award for this particular book in 1959. So we start off on another world. That's in part one, where we follow a group of 4 men from Earth who have come on a spaceship, and they are investigating this world with the view to should it be opened to Earth colonization or not. They seem to have a number of options on which they can vote: open to colonization, interdicted, limited access, lots of different things. And we see this question through the eyes of Father Ramon Ruz Sanchez, which I may or may not be pronouncing right, Peruvian in origin and a Jesuit priest. Now, the planet they're investigating is called Lithia, and it is a very unusual planet. I love how the descriptiveness of it was done. It's basically described as a predominantly ocean world with one large southern continent, 2 smaller northern continents, and an archipelago of islands in the far book. And at the back you've got an appendix, which is written as if it was an article written by 2 of the men on the expedition. It has a sentient and post-industrial species that are very, very unlike humanity. The ways in which they're unlike humanity include having a race with no religion, a perfect social morality. They lack many of the crimes and issues that human society has. And they're also reptilian. And in the last part of the description of this particular race and planet, we find a whole lot of interesting things. Blish describes a science that arose without heavy metals. So there's a lot of electronics, there's a lot of really wild stuff that an Earthman can't understand, though the physicist among them claims to. They have no magnetism because in the absence of metals, the magnetism isn't easy to discover. They had previously discovered it through something to do with oxygen or water that I honestly couldn't quite follow. But people who like science should love this. Our main character, as well as being a Jesuit priest, is a biologist, and the descriptions of the biology, the zoology, and the ecology were all things about this book that I loved. They built a really fascinating planet of Lithia. Now, when it comes to leaving the planet, the 4 people are in disagreement as to what the conclusion should be. 2 of the members of the party claim that it should be open for colonization as a way station, open for Earth to make contact. One person says it should be put under interdict and used only as military experimentation. This is obviously the bad guy. And Father Ramirez himself believes that it should be interdicted for all eternity, because due to the condition of perfect harmony combined with a lack of morality and choice, he has come to the conclusion that this planet is a manifestation of Satan. And before we go into part 2, I'm going to talk about the fly in this amber. This is very, very much a book which questions and speculates within the frame of Catholicism. And I believe back then, and even to a certain extent now, very few science fiction writers really took on Christianity at all, let alone Catholicism. A Canticle for Leibowitz stands out for many people because that is written within a Christian motif. I don't like A Canticle for Leibowitz, but I love this book. Yes, about religion, before we go much further, the prologue is written by the foreword, written by James Blish, has a distinct element of crotchety to it. This book was published in 1979, so it was a few years after its original publication in 1958, and there was time for Blish to be annoyed. He himself was an agnostic, and in his foreword to this edition he says, this novel is not about Catholicism, but since its hero is a Catholic theologian, it inevitably contains certain sticking points for those who subscribe to the doctrines of the Roman and to a lesser extent the Anglican churches. Readers who have no doctrinal preconceptions should not find these points even noticeable, let alone troublesome. Well, I certainly didn't find them troublesome, but I did find them noteworthy. So the what if in this scenario for James Blish is he's got a few assumptions about Christianity, that by 2050, when it's set, the rite of exorcism would be thoroughly eliminated. Now, apparently many people wrote to let him know that in 1958 it was still alive and well. But the what if behind this is basically about certain pluralities and opinions that Christianity, or possibly Catholicism, I'm not too sure, holds. So a lot of people who wrote him found that his hero's conclusion as to the nature of Lithia was far from inevitable. But the way he constructed it seems to be, if there are many planets inhabited by sentient creatures, as most astronomers, including Jesuits, suspected when he wrote this, then each one of such planets, solar or non-solar, must fall into one of 3 categories. In the first, it's inhabited by sentient creatures but without souls, so to be treated with compassion, but extra evangelically, whatever that is. 2, they could be inhabited by sentient creatures with fallen souls, so the devil's already got to them, through an original but not inevitable ancestral sin, so to be evangelized with urgent missionary charity, which when you look at the Pacific Islands today sounds horrific. The third option is inhabited by sentient, soul-endowed creatures that have not fallen, who therefore inhabit an unfallen, sinless, paradisical world, or, in other words, should be contacted not to propagandize but to learn from them. Since the Lithians in this book fit none of those categories, Blish was free to develop his theme, which is a really excellent one. Now, the second part of it, having got that out of the way, I myself am not Christian and certainly not Catholic. I often don't understand what they're on about, but I do respect the Jesuits in terms of the fact they're a learned community. There's a lot of Jesuit in here. I thought one of the things that was interesting was he developed the fact that a lot of the future science, or the UN science in the World Health Organization of 2050, actually has enclaves being operated by Jesuits. I don't know if that's the case today. I don't know, but apparently it was heading that way in 1958. So, in part 2, we're back on Earth. The parting gift of one of his hosts to Father Ruiz Sanchez was a beautifully created ceramic jar in which was a larval form of a Lithian, which is then raised on the planet. The planet is in an interesting social state, which Blish develops beautifully, though not exhaustively. So we're looking at a shelter society, as he calls it. And the way that developed was interesting because he talks about the social history of humanity starting in the 50s when there was the nuclear race. Then he goes through a few other races and finally he comes to a conclusion that sometime in his future, but our past, most human cities moved underground. Now, he is an American author, so of course it's mostly based in America. America is a first world country. Almost all of its citizens now live underground in huge shelters constructed at millions and $1 million of expense. And that was done in order to prevent future nuclear bombings. I think it was nuclear bombings. So it was a growth from the nuclear race. But having had that happen, there were social disturbances that allowed the UN to step in and declare the whole world basically a single protectorate. By doing that, they've eliminated the chance of future nuclear war, but everyone is still underground, which creates a whole set of interesting social problems that I imagine he probably did other books and explored it in those, because it's too interesting not to explore, really. Now, when they're back on Earth, this egg continues through its larval stage and its early juvenile stage, which is fascinating as it's described on the original planet. It emerges as an adult finally and becomes a strong agent of change, and not good change, in the world. It kind of, to me, almost contradicts Father Sanchez's opinion that these creatures are manifestly part of Satan. Now, I don't follow this argument terribly well, but it seems to be based on the fact that the home planet, Lithium, has no social combativeness whatsoever, and hence presumably no free choice. But this egg that's raised on Earth seems to completely lack this social morality. So at that point, you've got to start wondering if the social morality that's learned as an adult by Lithians from other adult Lithians isn't an active choice. They may be biologically motivated to accept that choice, but this particular Lithian that is on Earth isn't given that social framework, and so he goes mentally AWOL, as it were, and starts inciting an increasingly rebellious and angry human youth to revolt. Which brings us to the final set of the plot, where not Father Sanchez anymore. He's been defrocked by the Vatican, the Pope. He's been defrocked by the Pope because he has been accused of heresy. Apparently, under Catholic structure, you can't ascribe creation to the devil, but he's ascribed the planet of Lithia as a creation of the devil. So he's defrocked, but the Pope tells him that he believes that they are in an actual combat, good against evil sort of thing, and that Father Sanchez's option is basically to exercise, that's it, is to exercise the whole planet of Lithia, which is apparently the demon. In a complex and quite interesting story, the one Lithian on Earth ends up going back there, and the whole thing goes kaboom due to Father Sanchez. Well, not due to Father Sanchez's. Due to the bad guy going back there and doing stupid chemical experiments, but at the same time, we have Ruth Sanchez exercising it. I, a priest of Christ, do command ye, move foul spirits who do stir up these clouds, that ye depart from them and disperse yourselves into wild and untilled places. Can I just say, I've never read an exorcism before. This stuff rocks. It rocks and it rolls. So that was thoroughly interesting. Actually, the whole book, it was a bit of a slow start for me at first because they're on this planet and I didn't quite get what was happening. Couldn't quite get into the minds of the two guys. This is one of those books where if you like that scale, sounds like Bishal. Oh, You know, the one where you have, in order to read a book, you have to have two women talking about something that isn't a man with no man present, something like that. Sounds like bechamel. Anyway, if you're subscribed to that particular index, you won't like this book. There's only one serious character as a female. She only appears in part 2. And you will probably take extreme exception to the guy in the first part who says, I don't think women should be scientists, they're too emotional. His name's Paul Cleaver. He's the bad guy. He's the bad guy. He said bad things. He said worse things than that. That's just the one that some people aren't going to like particularly. Overall, I think it's a marvellous book. It has dated in some ways, but completely failed to date in terms of an exciting concept, great science fiction, and excellent writing. This is classic sci-fi at its best, and why after all these years that sci-fi is still one of my favourite go-to genres. Marvellous book.